All right. Can anyone see that thing on screen? The big, yeah, brilliant. Okay, we're back. So, where was I before panicking about 150 people? Yes, scary good comp strategy. Yeah, essentially we have um three quite good guests and then a little me to talk about this stuff. And I have to say, this thing started kind of very accidentally because I think it may have started, correct me if I'm wrong, Whitney, Michael, and Joe, but I shared a thing on LinkedIn about kind of some stats that I thought were interesting about comm strategy. And it kind of mini blew up. I can't really claim to blow up anything when I have Joe Burns on the call, but because he does much better numbers than I do. Um, but basically, we're like, oh, hey, we should be, maybe, maybe people are kind of yearning for this shit. So shall we do something about it? And so we started talking about it. And in the spirit of this brief, we kind of started realizing that we were actually facing a little bit of a horror story. Sorry, anyone who isn't on mute, if you don't mind putting yourselves on mute, that would be phenomenal. Thank you. A bit of a horror story around comm strategy. Like, for example, hey, you started a webinar and then you capped your own attendance. No, it's a different thing. Um, we kind of noticed a bit of a tension going on because comm strategy gets basically fuck all attention in the discourse. Of course, there are people talking about this stuff, but proportionally to the rest, I can tell you 20 great brand strategy thinkers on LinkedIn, and then I can tell you like four people that I know are consistently talking about comm strategy. They are four very good people, but I wish there was more. And so we started thinking, oh, well, let's kind of hold the space we wish that existed. And then the other thing, and it's kind of an observation I've shared with a lot of people, but I actually think the market is undersupplied for good comp strategy thinking. And I would even wager it's oversupplied of good brand strategy thinking because again, there's a lot of people who want to do brand strategy and who do it very, very well. And then when it comes to comp strategy, it's kind of a let's just fudge some messaging matrices and kind of call that a job done. And so we kind of thought, hey, let's talk about it. Let's talk about the philosophical. Let's talk about why this shit matters. By the way, I swear a lot. If there is anyone with sensitivities to swearing, I'm sorry, but it is a horror themed event, so it's fine. Um, but yeah, let's talk about the philosophical. Like, why do we care so much, right? Because and you'll see some really interesting perspectives from our different people in the group, but also the practical, right? I think the problem sometimes with kind of strategy-led events is the fact that we have theories and models and this and that, but as much as possible, I want you to leave some of this today with some kind of tools and examples and things that the way I described it is almost like when you're panicking, you can always fall back on them, right? There's always that little moment of panic. Oh my God, I don't know what I'm doing after all. Just fall back on some mental tricks to kind of ground yourself again. And so we're going to discuss a series of things like how did you get into comm strategy? What is it? What is it not? Underrated skills. First thing you do when you get client brief, how do you add value to the creative process? There's many more questions we could discuss, but effectively we are going to kind of, we only have, well, now about an hour. I'm going to try and keep us a bit honest with time, but honestly, let's see how the conversation goes, right? So I'm going to start with just how did you get into it? So let's use this as a way of introduction, really. But maybe Whitney, let's start with you. How did you get into comms strategy?
Sure, happy to take it away. First of all, nothing in my life or career has followed a particularly linear journey. I got into strategy after a very brief career in PR in London, where essentially I enjoyed the creative part of it, but I felt like we were doing things that were quite reactive and gimmicky sometimes, and they weren't really grounded in insight, right? Or what was actually moving the business. And so I wound up finding my way to strategy after having that sort of quarter century existential crisis. And I went to the Miami ad school. I got my first job in brand strategy. And I was a brand strategist for about 5 years. And at that point, I was working for an agency where we had media in house, And I started to get really frustrated by the fact that we weren't, media was sitting down the hall, but we were not joined up with media. And I started to find little projects here and there where we could start to join up medium and message a bit more. So, for instance, there was a project, I think it was a project for the ad council that I worked on underage drinking and driving. And we built a night out journey for teens on, teens going to parties on the weekend. And that helped shape a lot of the recommendations around media and placements. And of course, the ad council gets donated media, so some of it is what it is, but we could at least provide them a really smart recommendation about where they were showing up. And then I got recruited by MEC, which is now two mergers later, WPP Media, and they wanted to hire comm strategists that had actually kind of more of a brand strategy, creative strategy background. So that became like my crash course in media and working at a media agency. And then I went back to creative agencies. Long story short, I now lead strategy at the Gate New York. I'm very much a hybrid thinker, but that's essentially how I got my comms chops.
Brilliant. Joe, you here?
Yes, I am.
All right.
I'll go really quick for this bit. I was a 2008 grad, so like worst time in history to be a graduate. Maybe it's worse now. Sorry if anyone's a graduate listening to this, but good luck. Send me a message on LinkedIn or something. I'll give you some tips. But like, it was a really tough time to graduate. Anyway, I floated around various digital firms for a while, and then I got hired by a media agency by a bloke called John Stevens, who is now Chief Growth Officer of WPP Media. At the time, he was a manager on in the international department, and I think he hired me because I'm from the Midlands and he's from the Midlands, and there's just not many people from the Midlands working in London in media. And he was like, "Oh, another bloke from the Midlands to go to the pub with." Anyway, I was on the international media coordination team, and it was a really crap job because all you did was email people in Turkey, Ukraine, France, Germany, and said, send me your media plans. And they send you their media plans, or you do a competitive analysis and you're pulling together these reports, and you'd make literally 2 reports a month out of all this stuff. Anyway, I hate doing boring things. So I just used Excel and wrote macros on Excel that would just do my job for me. And here's the first tip. If you do that, if you can automate your job, do not tell your manager, tell someone on the team you want to work on. And the comm strategists were really interesting. So I went to those guys. I was like, look, I've just basically like automated my job away. I just got clever macros I've made on Excel that do it all for me and make these reports. So can like I use that time to work with you rather than doing more report collation. And they were like, yeah, mate, that sounds great. We could use someone who knows how to do data. I got hired by the, well, I didn't get hired. I got moved onto the comm strategy team after moonlighting for them secretly for a few months. And then we worked on HTC, we're a smartphone manufacturer, and they're really ascendant at the time. And we worked with Mother, and Mother was like, and this happens all the time, and it used to happen a lot 10 years ago, but creative agencies would have these brilliant big idea TV ads, and then they would just do the shittest digital stuff, and it still happens today, like digital and social stuff. It's crazy that this still happens today, but it does. And the clients get pissed off because they're like, well, 50% of our budget is going. Anyway, so in that meeting, I tossed out this kind of thought, or I can't remember what it was, but tossed out this thought. And then the strategist at Mother, James Broomfield, who's now like partner, I think, at BBH London, he was like, dude, send me your CV. We need someone like you. And Mother brought me in as a comm strategist to help them not get angry clients and to push the output of the agency to a more modern place. So that's my story.
Cool. Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I originally early in my career didn't even work in advertising. I don't even know if I wanted to go into advertising. I didn't know what a single role in advertising actually was. When I was graduating school, so I graduated just before Joe in '06, and I was in investment bank intern and I worked in commercial real estate investment, and I thought I was going to go the finance track, which um, I realized pretty short, quickly on that this was not a career for me. Studying for Series 7 and Series 6.3 tests and learning about shorting and longing and options and puts and all that stuff was just not my bag. So I took the first job in advertising that I could find. I didn't even know what any of these roles were. Account person, media person, trafficking, like all of these different types of roles. And I was like, I'll just take the first one that gives me an offer, and it was media. And so I kind of started down this media track, but I think over the course of time, what I really started to love about just like working in different roles in advertising, and this is what led me to where I'm at now, is that I like solving all different types of problems. And it could be a media problem, it could be a communications problem, it could be a strategic problem, it could be a creative problem, which kind of led me down this path of going towards comms, because I think what you'll see as we talk about it through the course of this session is that comms is kind of for misfit thinkers a little bit, and that's kind of what I've always been in my career, is a little bit of a misfit, never fit neatly like in any really simple box. And I think that's led me to work at some of the places I have, like Giant Spoon, or working on really cool, big, interesting brands like Adidas, to even where I'm at now, running media at an agency called R&R Partners. Is I've always kind of attacked comms from that standpoint to some of the stuff that was talked about earlier. Like, it's not messaging frameworks and creative matrices and flowcharts and funnels and journeys, but it's really about like what's got me excited about it and has led me here. It's really the study of how communications works between brands, messaging, medium, and people. And I think that I've just followed that path that's allowed me to tackle those types of interesting problems throughout my career.
Wonderful. Um, I maybe say it's just a bit of a segue. Like I was asked the other day, I'm freelancing with Droga 5 in London, and I work with a really good comm strategy director, and he kind of asked me, "Are you a comm strategist by training?" And I said, "No, I don't think I'm anything by training. I stumbled upwards into things, right? Because I started managing Facebook pages for Universal Music in Portugal. Fuck's sake, you know, I knew I knew who Justin Bieber was before pretty much anyone in Portugal, which is such a bad flex. But but essentially from there, social, from there, kind of dipping into kind of comms and brand. And then kind of over time, I started realizing that I really like brand strategy, and I really, it's obviously hugely important, but I find myself kind of similar to you, Michael. Like I never quite fit into the exact kind of mold of what a brand strategist should be and do and look like. And I've always really liked the interconnectedness of how different media work together. And so I wouldn't say today I'm kind of a comm strategist, but I'm so into it because it just feels, like I said, so important and so underrepresented. So yeah, one way or another, and this is always a story of how people get into strategy. It's like, you know, you just kind of happen to walk into a place and then people go, "Do you want to do this now?" And you go, "Sure." Um, but yeah,
Well, I think to your point, though, what's interesting about it is it's given comm strategists at their heart are a little bit of misfit hybrid thinkers,
yeah,
but the discipline itself has been given a bit of a, for lack of a better phrase, a bit of a vanilla-ing,
yeah,
when all of the different media agencies out there decided to stop calling their media planners and started calling them comms planners.
yeah.
And then it became a glorified media planning
Yeah,
role, which
I
in
really want to
reality, I think it's much deeper than that.
I want to jump in here because I think like this misfit thing is so true. And the reason that comms strategy is insanely problematic for the advertising agencies, the creative agencies, and the media agencies is because it's the one function that does not say the answer has to be buy a paid media spot and make something to put in it.
Hmm.
And that is how they make money. So, like, you're always going to be a little bit disruptive if you're there and say, no, let's sod TV, we're not going to do a TV ads, we're going to tattoo the brand logo on a banana. We're going to get 1 million bananas and we're going to tattoo the logo on a banana. That's the idea. And like, there's agencies don't really have a set process to monetize that in the same way. Oh yeah, we can do a TV production and we can buy a load of media space to put that TV ad in. And that I think is why, despite clients really wanting comm strategy and wanting the disproportionate punch above its weight gains that it gives you, I think the agency system kind of dislikes it because it doesn't come with a foregone conclusion that the most
Mhm.
profitable things the agency sells are the right things for the clients to do. And that's where the tension lies. Anyway, that's a chip
I
on my shoulder, as you can tell.
No,
It's a
it's
good
no,
100%.
segue.
I
It's a
was
good
just gonna
segue.
say,
Let's get into
oh
some definitions. Like what,
no.
we know what it's not, but what is it? Whitney?
I was gonna say I think Michael gave a really great definition of it earlier. That it's fundamentally about how the brand shows up through the in the world through medium and message. And I think what's interesting too, and I think Joe touched on this a little bit, is that sometimes the conversation around comm strategy is very campaign specific when yes, and absolutely like it should be. And I think there's a lot of work that the sort of industry writ large needs to do to get better at doing comm strategy for individual campaigns, but it's so much bigger than that. It's a You can exercise comm strategy at the brand level. That's I've been doing that for a couple of my clients over the last couple of years, really looking. I mean, and that's when you're treating comm strategy as sort of like almost like a marketing discipline and saying, okay, let's look at your entire calendar, let's look at your business goals, let's look at your audiences and really think about how are you showing up holistically in a way that's going to be most impactful, and then drilling down to the campaigns.
Hmm. I think it's the most interesting part when you do it at the brand level too, because you're
Yeah.
really shaping. Like if I've always said, like if brand strategy's job is to figure out what story to tell, comm strategy's job is to figure out how to tell that story and like how, to your point, like it shows up in the world. And that could be through a guiding sort of like brand behavior that infuses every piece of media and communications that goes out there. It could be through a way to think about media differently, like simple tactical ways of, you know what, in this category, there's no such thing as a journey anymore. We're going to kill it. We're going to decrease the latency between exposure and conversion and every single touch point that somebody has with this brand go. Like, and it could be varying degrees of like strategic philosophy, thoughtfulness, all the way down to practical, tangible, tactical implementation and execution. It's just how does that anchor to what the brand wants to stand for and be about?
And
Yeah, my model is this for comm strategies. There's really three types or three modes. I'm, I like in the Hindu system, they have like three gods, like multiple aspects of the god. And I think comm strategy is a bit like that. It has different aspects, like Shiva, and you know what I mean? Are the different aspects of the same thing. But with comms, I think those modalities or aspects, and I'm going to give a kind of analogy. I'll use the banana thing because I think it's funny and I've just made it up and I'm going to run with it. But like, let's say your client is a perfume brand that's launching a banana scented perfume, right? There's three ways you can do comm strategy. The first way is before the idea. The second way is after the idea. And the last way is the comm strategy is the idea, right? So if you're doing comm strategy before the idea and this perfume brand says, hey, we've got a banana scented perfume, what you'll do is you'll go away and you'll go, okay, let's look at the kind of people who are like gourmand, fruity fragrances. Let's find the places they are. Let's look at what the competition do. And let's build this almost, you're like an architect in a way, where you build this kind of big comms plan and go, we know that they're here. We know the purchase journey looks like that. And it's very like a top down view. And that happens before anyone's made an idea, and it becomes this big ecosystem chart. And then you give that to a creative agency or whoever's coming up with the idea, and they develop a big thought that can kind of be draped across this scaffolding that you build. The second way is after the idea, and this tends to be more common, I think, for comm strategists in creative agencies. And I think this one, it's much more linear. So it's like the creators might have an idea, which is like, oh, monkeys like bananas. So let's do a script and a film idea about monkeys and bananas. And then one monkey gets the perfume. I'm making this up and I'm not a creative, but let's do a spot about sexy monkey with banana perfume. Very strange, but whatever. Um, like, let's say you do that, then as a comm strategist, the creators will be like, "How do we make this really big?" And you'll be like, "Oh, let's do a pop-up at a zoo, and let's take the idea and we'll put it on this day part and we'll do a sponsor. We'll get David Attenborough to do some PR story." So really, what you're doing is taking an idea that the creators have had, sexy monkey, and then you're finding ways to amplify it. The third way, which I think is rarer, but the most exciting and interesting, is when the comm strategy is the idea. And what you're doing there, that's when you go, actually, wouldn't it be cool if we tattooed bananas with the logo? And we just guerrilla campaigned. I didn't even think about that pun, but it works. Guerrilla campaign, where we go to supermarkets and we stamp bananas with the logo of the perfume. And it's much more disruptive. It tends to be much more about massive disproportionate noise and earned media value. That to me is the most exciting form of comm strategy. It's also the hardest to do because you need a perfect situation where you've got open-minded creatives who will listen to ideas that aren't from the creative department. That precludes about 50% of creatives in my book, in my experience, who like they want creativity to only live in their department. You need clients who are willing to do something that's big and noisy and not fitting into a machine. And then you need a production team who are willing to go on that journey with you. And like, but when you can do those things, it's amazing. So like there, that's my model. The three, it's like before the idea, after the idea is the idea.
Can I just add something to that? Because one of the things that, firstly, I really empathize with kind of the issues of only creatives get to be creative, which sure, they are very creative at some things, but creativity isn't like, you don't have a patent over it. There's different forms of creativity, and thinking about media and thinking about the orchestration of how something goes to market is a form of creativity. But one thing I notice is that, and I'm sure we've all, going back to what you were saying, Joe, about kind of Mother doing really good TV ads and then kind of not doing very good anything else. I find that a lot of times what we're given to work with is not even an idea, it's a script. And it's like, oh, what's the idea? Well, the idea is we open on a someone, drinking a cup of tea, and then something happens. You go, no, 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 no. What's the idea behind it? And 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 it's one of those things that, like, I'm sure someone has in their head the idea about what that script is, but you need to actually write it to understand how you carry that idea to other media, whether you even can carry that idea to other media. You know, I need to find a catchy title for it, but this kind of this the wicked handover is maybe what I'll call it between like the above the line agency and the other agencies. I'm going through
Yeah.
that process now where like, we have scripts that pre-tested really well. We've done some really good out of home, etc. But when we're briefing, say, a social agency or a below the line agency, what they want to know is what's the thought behind all of this? Because I can't just take your TVC and go, I'm going to make a really kind of crappy TikTok off the back of those stills or whatever, off the back of that edit. I need to know the thought behind that TVC in order to then know how to kind of amplify it elsewhere. And
Yeah.
so it's almost like strangely we find ourselves in the position of needing to extract what is the idea behind this thing? Oh, got it. Now I can do my job, which is very strange. We shouldn't have to ask for those things, right?
Yeah. I tell my team this, and I told my teams this like at past jobs too. And I'll even share a bit of like an anecdote too. So when I was so working on Adidas, we worked closely, and there's probably some folks on here on the call from 72 and Sunny, who is the creative agency. And we made it a mission of ours, big holding company, media agency, Kara, massive, I think at the time, maybe independent creative agency in 72 and Sunny. which you would think, oh, this is going to be a fraught relationship, right? In the sense that like disconnected media and creative, how are they going to work together? All the things that everybody thinks of as, but I made it a point to my team of like our job as comms folks and media folks is help them find the potential in every idea that they have. I don't care if it's a TV spot. I don't care if it's a social post. I don't care what it is. Our job is to help them find the potential in that. And so we would work with them and we would see, say, like a script or something like that for a spot. And our job would be to go, that is awesome. You know what we could do with that? We could do this. We could do that. We could do this. And so, for instance, there was a spot that they shared, and I go, and it was going to use a bunch of teenagers doing some crazy stuff for a global football type campaign. And I was like, you know what we should do? What do 16-year-olds do when they do something stupid? They film it, give them all cell phones, and have them record it and capture footage when they're actually doing this wild act. And then we'll leak it on social media and then we'll use the found footage play, and then we'll go, subversively seed it with like Sky Sports or Bleacher Report or Copa 90 or whomever. Oh, and then we'll debut it and release it and say, like, look, it was actually us all along. As a, as just as an example. And all that came from a script. All of that came from a 30. And it was really about like to me, like that's part of our job is working with creatives. And I think sometimes creatives can get a bad rap of like they start with a script, but I also think that it's an industry that's been trained to start script first, and it's
Agree.
hard to break 80 years or whatever of muscle memory.
I,
And
I agree, but I do want to throw a little bit of a spanner into what you're saying. I believe that creatives really are experts in craft. I don't just mean that in production craft and slickness. I mean like the craft that goes into refining a script, the craft that goes into making a really great poster or whatever medium the thing is. But I think there's this really simply not factually true idea that creatives have are experts in ideas. And I don't think that is true. I think the idea is an emergent thing that happens when you've got the right set of people. And that might be a data scientist, let alone a comm strategist. You've got the right set of people having a discussion and talking about things, right? So you've got the right set of people talking, and some of them should be creatives who are experts in script writing, experts in making posters, experts in all of those forms that the advertising can take. But the idea itself should never just sit as a domain that the creators have sole domain over, you know? And I
oh,
think
I 100%
that
agree.
that for me is but what's happened is I think more so here in the States than in London, where I think the relationships within an agency are a little bit different. I think there's been this idea that like, and I think it does go back to Burnback in a way, which is like, again, I just don't think this is true, which is like space creatives are special, they're different, they are capable of creating ideas. You know what I mean? And I think that's a really dangerous and ultimately for the industry, it's
Yeah.
a dangerous principle to hold because they are ultimately experts in the craft of an idea, not in the actual like idea itself, if you get what I mean. So I think like that's something that the narrative needs to develop and change around for the industry to stay relevant. Because I think the media channels that you're using are constantly fragmenting and evolving. And if you're saying, oh, these people, they're the experts in ideas, and their CV is just like 130-second TV spots, you're kind of aligning what an idea is with a specific craft skill. Do you get what I mean?
Hey,
Yeah, oh,
can I add
100%.
to that? So as I mentioned, I come from the world of like social and content and stuff like that. And way back in when it used to be called like, editorial and stuff like that. And it feels old school now to talk about editorial and brands and publishers, but there is something useful about the world of editorial, which is a bit like if you watch like the newsroom or whatever, it's or any journalism show, you have a writers and journalists room. They're all pitching ideas of stories, and the editor calls the shots. And I think for me, there's something interesting about that because the danger of not having an editor is that everyone's kind of just kicking around thoughts and no one makes a decision. Someone needs to make a decision, but that doesn't mean that person is the only person who can come up with an idea. And so, I'll give you an example. I'm doing some government work here in the UK for around the NHS. And I was yesterday in a review with, the CCO, the creative director, and the team working on it. And it was just so nice to kind of see this is where they got to. And then we kicked around what the actual idea was. And, the amount of confidence that comes from the creative director, where he's intentionally asking, what do we think the idea here is? It felt very collaborative. Ultimately, it's his call of what the thing that goes on the page is. But the fact he was going, I feel like it's a bit of this. And then I started throwing around different analogies about how, the NHS is like the Marmite of institutions. You love to hate it or you hate to love it. And he was like, okay, I'm going to use that. It doesn't mean that's going to be the thing. But there is something about everyone has a chance to pitch in, but then you have an editor that goes, okay, I think we're going to take a bit of that, bit of that, bit of that, bit of that. And that's how you almost like reduce the blind spots of someone's thinking, because you're getting people to go from different perspectives so that the person kind of feels like they have everything they need to then go, okay, this idea would work from the perspective of someone who really knows social and creator, someone who really knows how out of home works, someone who really knows how TV works, etc., etc. So yeah, I think the editorial analogy perhaps could make a tiny, tiny comeback just on that ways of working bit alone.
Yeah, or even just the band or songwriting analogy. I
Yeah.
remember a friend of mine years ago saying that the process of creating advertising should be like being in a band. It should be like songwriting. Eventually someone's going to sit down and write the lyrics or someone's going to write the music, but everyone's throwing ideas at the table. And I think what Joe expressed is really important because there are a lot of agencies, particularly in the holding company model, that have built businesses that quite frankly reinforce silos because they're very deliverable based. And so when someone says, well, people are going to know I did my job because I wrote this script, or people are going to know I did my job because I made this framework, or I wrote this creative brief, it incentivizes the opposite of the behaviors that we're all advocating for in this conversation.
Yeah. I'm going to use that as actually a bit of a segue. See, this is so organic. I fucking love it, right? Um, let's talk about skills, underrated skills, and this can be hard skills like knowing how to do macros so people can get off your ass. But, just like what are the skills that are important beyond just being, a bit of a mischief that doesn't fit anywhere?
I have a lot of opinions about this. Do you
Please
mind if
do.
I
Go
if
for
I
it. Go
go
for it.
first? I think the biggest underrated skill of a comm strategist, and I would say a strategist in general, maybe this is an underrated life skill, but relational skills, because I think that no one really cares that much about your output if they don't first like and respect you as a human. And I think and I think for comm strategists in particular, because it is such a misunderstood discipline, you have to do a lot of relationship building. You have to do a little bit of politicking. You have to go into these environments, and especially environments in which an ecosystem is very fixed, and introduce yourself as this foreign object that can be accepted. And I will say, that was a huge part of my experience when I went to a creative agency after working at a media agency as a comms strategist specialist, because a lot of my experiences in probably the first 3 to 6 months were exactly what Joe was describing, where it's like, oh, hey, we have this idea, come and give us a framework or give us some ideas about how we can make it bigger. And I had to sort of go in person by person and say, you need to bring me in when we're getting briefed by the client, potentially even earlier. I need to be part of the fabric of how this team works, because then we can start to do more of the sorts of things where we're thinking about audiences as the brief is getting written. We are all sitting in a room thinking about, to your point, Rob, what the idea even is. And once you're having those conversations, then you can think in more interesting ways about where it shows up and where it happens. So I think probably one of the best things any of us could do is buy the book How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Can I add a quick
Or at
thought
least
on?
get the Cliff's notes
Yeah.
and apply that to how you go about doing your job.
Can I add a little thing to that just before maybe I'll pass on to you,
Totally.
Michael? But one thought I have is it's actually wrong to label us knowledge workers because knowledge is becoming cheap, whether it's true or false. But just go with me on this. But there's something about trust being more important than knowledge, right? If
100%.
you may be very smart, but if no one trusts you, no one wants to work with you. If no one wants to work with you, they will involve you till the very last minute, if at all. Um, but that idea of being able to like go and sit with a CD and kind of talk a little bit about what we're doing, to go and sit with the account lead and go, here's what, almost like the process is selling the thinking is part of the process. It's not just a thing that happens in a meeting. You're always selling gets a bad rap, but that sense of like being able to soft sell as you go is quite important. So yeah, trust has been very much on my mind, not just because of like trust that you know what you're doing, but also that you feel trustworthy, perhaps, or that you're not in opposition to the creatives. You're not there to tell them they're being, dinosauric in their thinking. Not at all. If anything, you go, hey, I love where you're at. If we take a step back to the idea behind this script, here's what else we could take it. Do you want to explore that? And that takes trust because they need to know you're not going to fuck them over, basically.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's not built by shutting yourself in a room and writing slides. I think
And working it
sometimes,
all out and cracking it.
yeah, yeah, and because I think, and I've seen this happen. I've certainly been guilty of it in my career. I think strategists, because the thing we do is not the thing that's visible to the outside world, we can get so obsessed with the slide, with the words, with the and think like, oh god, that's the thing that's people are going to think I'm so smart because I wrote this beautiful slide. And that's not what frequently happens, right? It's like
Yeah.
people think what you wrote on the slide is smart because they've understood you, they've understood how you think, they've understood how you want to work and collaborate with them and make the end product meaningful and better.
Yeah, there is doing the
Mhm.
strategy and selling the strategy. Very, very different
Yeah,
things as well. Michael, what's your
totally.
take?
Yeah, I agree with what Whitney said about the relationships piece because I think that as such of a kind of hybrid, and to use the word we've been talking about, like misfit discipline, you have to build relationships with all kinds of different people to help accelerate thinking and improve thinking. So like there are times in my past where I'm the third creative partner,
Hmm.
where I'm sitting there working the walls with the creative teams, looking at ideas, helping expand things, kill things, add on to things, to Joe's point, coming up with new ideas, and having that relationship. But then I've also, at times, in my past life, one of the things I said is that a brand strategist and comm strategist should be the strategy version of an art director and a copywriter. Like that's how they should work together, where you're cracking briefs together, you're cracking challenges together. And much like an art director and a copywriter, where the relationship and who's the lead and who's behind the scenes flows over the course of a campaign, that's kind of how a brand and a comm strategist should work, is they're working dynamically to crack a brief and a challenge at it from, two different perspectives.
Yeah.
You kind of have to know a little bit about how to do everything so that way you're, able to provide value to every sort of like room that you're in. And I think one of the things I would push on with what Whitney said, and I would say this to, a lot of the junior folks that are in this room now, is is this tension between asking to be involved earlier and proving why you should be involved earlier. Because I've worked with a lot of junior folks in my career who've been like, well, why aren't they bringing me earlier in the process? Why can't I get involved earlier? I need to be involved in the briefing. And I'm like, prove why you need to be involved in there. Don't ask, prove. Because and I say that because one of the things, and that I think is a soft skill that people that especially in comms need to have is the ability to work with pace. And the reason I say that is because, and it's for some of the stuff we've talked about before, is when the advertising is machine is not built for you, because it's built around creative outputs and media planning and buying and inserting messages and channels, and that's how it makes money. When the machine's not built around you, the machine's not going to wait for you. And therefore, you have to move fast and quick and nimble and prove your value in the short term so you can be invited into those rooms and provide those contributions and provide the help where you can. So that way you're always invited into the room because you're going to bring a different perspective. You're going to bring a bit of novel thinking, a bit of a different idea. And so I think those connect to one of the other skills too, which is this, I've talked about it, like the idea of like being a hybrid or being a chameleon and being able to do different things in different moments and being able to tackle different challenges for whatever the client may have at hand. Because as a misfit discipline, sometimes the comm strategist needs to play culture strategist and figure out here's how we need to show up in music or sports or whatever
Mhm.
it may be. Sometimes you're sitting with a big holdco media agency if you're at the creative side and you need to help them make infuse a bit more creativity into the rigor of their media plan. Sometimes you're sitting with the brand strategist cracking a brief. Sometimes you're pouring through thousands of rows of MRI data or something like that. Like you kind of have to be able to do all of those things as a comm strategist. And so you need to be a hybrid. You need to be a chameleon to fit into those different rooms.
Yeah.
I,
I
I agree totally with all the stuff about relationships, and I'm not poo-pooing any of that. So don't take this. I'm not like poo-pooing on that, but I do think there is one relationship that the comms strategist has to have that a lot of other people don't, and that's the relationship between what's happening in an agency and with clients and reality, right? If you think about a lot of the things we use to make ideas, clients, internally, in presentations, they're vapor. They're not real. We use measures that aren't real. Awareness, consideration, they're not real things. You know what I mean? Like they're just these abstractions of things. In a deck, you'll have a manifesto. No human outside of the meeting is going to see this stuff. You know what I mean? Like all of this stuff is abstraction. And then you have concepts like brand and performance. None of it's real. It's just kind of like a film that you layer onto reality to try and operate as a business around it. And I think one of the things that comm strategy brings is to be the person in the room who's saying, "Hold on a minute, there's no such thing as awareness. That's not a real thing." It's not like people go, "Oh, I'm aware of that brand now." You know what I mean? Like, and to be the one who's constantly like hammering on these useful but fundamentally unsophisticated and low fidelity ideas that we need to use in order to communicate. And I can give a really good example of this. And it was actually in the brand planning development of a project I was working on. I was working with a travel brand years ago, so not one that I've worked with recently. So if there's a client from one of them on the call, don't worry, I'm not going to throw you guys on the bus. Years ago, I was working for this travel brand in the UK. And the way they make money as a business is by getting people to go to their website and search for different vacations, holidays that they could go on. And then every time someone clicks out of the website, they get 20 pence, like a small amount of money. Anyway, so they'd spent all this time and they'd built all these consumer journeys and they'd got to an overall brand proposition of like, we get you the right one first time. And they presented that to me, and I'm sitting there as the comm strategist. I'm like, guys, I just want to make something clear to you. Currently, people click on average 15 different websites. So let's say it's 10p for easy maths. You get £1.50 per customer who comes to your website. If you actually deliver on this proposition you've developed for the brand, you've just cut your revenue down to 10p per customer. So this is the worst possible positioning for your brand. Because yeah, you might think, oh, the consumers, oh, it will make awareness go up and it'll resonate with them. We've got really high engagement scores. But fundamentally, if you think about the real nuts and bolts of how your business works, it would kill you, but it would kill the business. Like you wouldn't be able, you'd always lose your jobs. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think being the one who can, and you have to be a bit spiky, but being the one who goes, hold on a minute, what on earth does consideration mean for soft drinks? No one considers soft drinks. That's not real. You know what I mean? No one's sitting there, oh, well, maybe if I had more educational content about this soft drink. You know what I mean? And I think that's a thing that really you kind of have to own as a comm strategist.
Yeah.
Rob,
Yeah.
Rob, can I jump in and just
Of
say
course you
something
can.
to add to what both Joe and Michael said? I think both of the examples that you guys expressed uh, relate to another really important skill that I think you need as a comm strategist, which is being a good improviser. So I think in addition to buying
Challenge
houses, renting,
accepted.
people take an improv class because regardless of the context, you have to be able to think on your feet and come up with solutions quite quickly. And I think that that is a distinction sometimes between comm strategy and I guess traditionally how brand strategy is thought of. You don't always get the luxury of going, oh, I'm going to just read through all of this and contemplate. You have to in the moment be able to pull from a lot of different tools, information sources to help reframe thinking.
Yeah. I was just saying in the chat, surprise, the tech fuck up was a lesson, everyone. You need to think on your feet. Yeah. So,
No,
yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
was lesson one. Yep.
Exactly. And now, young Padawans, let's move on. Um, okay. I want to talk about this, right? First thing you do when you get a client brief. And I used to work at an agency called VCCP, which had a lot of really smart people, also a lot of posh
Hey,
people.
fuck!
Okay. Someone really hates VCCP in this chat.
Apparently.
Um, and one of the things that our chairman used to talk about is, he's very nice, very smart guy, but he called it the nausea of incomprehension. But basically, that moment where you get a client brief and you go, fuck me if I know how to solve this. There's always that moment, right? And then you move past it because that's what experience and practice gives you. But I wanted to get a sense from all of you, like, what's the first thing you do when you get a client brief beyond just, breathing? Michael, you had a really good example that perhaps, anonymized the brand and stuff, but, can you give me an example of
Yeah.
the stuff we talked about on WhatsApp the other day?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would always do when I would crack a brief is figure out how you translate whatever the business challenge is to a communications challenge. And how do you use communications to ultimately change a behavior or belief around the brand to then drive back to that business challenge? Is it growing? Is it driving sales velocity? Is it opening up new occasions? Um, is it a pricing repositioning or whatever it is? And how do you translate that into a communications problem? And I think so often what happens is like people take a brief and they immediately go to, okay, ad solution. Like what kind of ad can we create to do this thing? And I, I would always look at it as like, okay, what is sort of the um, behavior change or belief that we're trying to do, and what are sort of the headwinds or tailwinds to that behavior, like currently in the world, and what are the things that are stopping that behavior? What are the things that are happening that could accelerate that behavior? Um, and then I actually dive into like the kind of what I was talking about before of like how do communications work, right? So I'll share an example. So we were working with a brand that really wanted to start to expand some of their category entry points. They're like, we need to be known for more occasions because we're really singularly known for this one spot to have our product. And like, we need to expand, we need to expand. And their default was like, okay, let's create a bunch of TV ads that show us being used in these other occasions. And then that's going to help us. And I was like, that's not how communications works. Like, you can't just put a TV spot out there and say, now have us here instead of here. And so what we would do, and we dove into, is like, okay, how do you people build associations? And there's like this theory called it's going into like behavioral economics and psychology and all that kind of stuff called like like associative networks. And how do you build those? And there's clear principles for what you need to do to build these associative networks. Everything from contextual repetition to cue priming to social norming to equity borrowing, so on and so forth. And that became the structure for how you respond to this brief of here's how you want to grow your occasions. You don't need TV spots. You need repetition. You need persistent things you do constantly as a brand that guide your behavior in these moments. You need cue priming. You need to show up at the same times in the same places and trigger the usage of that product in that moment. You need to make it feel like everybody else is using your product in that moment to make people feel like they're missing out on um, why they're not consuming it. And so that's, I use that example of like that to me is how you start to the best way to start to tackle a brief is look at the thing holistically because there's a lot of stuff out there I think that really can broaden, as another example, like broaden thinking. Like we were tasked with launching like a new product for a client and they're like, we need to make this a massive cultural hit. We need to go viral and all the shit that, brands say all the time. And so rather than just like saying like, okay, like let us think about that, we dove into books. We read books like Hit Makers by Derek Thompson, which is like the science of popularity in the age of distraction. We read books like fan or super fandom, which was basically about an article about how One Direction fangirls entered and created the modern internet. We read Contagious. We read like all of these different like books that weren't necessarily just ad books, but it's like, what's the science of popularity so we can make something as popular as humanly possible? And what it actually created was sort of a model that we could follow for the product launch. That's like, let's do this, then we need this, then we need to do this, then we need to do this. And you're creating a calm solution using, I think, broader psychology and theory and all of that than just like, okay, here we go, let's make an ad. Um, and that to me is like, I think what I coach a lot of folks to, especially junior folks, is like expand your worldview. Like, do not just think in terms of ads. Read culture books, read psychology books, read on economics, like, because then you're going to tackle briefs in different ways.
Can I just add to that? So, like I mentioned earlier, I'm doing some behavior change stuff. And the crux of a brief I'm working on is around basically people have a perception of an institution, and then you have the facts that you need to that will convince them otherwise. And without giving away the answer, I think the way I got to helping unlock the brief was actually by reading about child psychology, because I'm reading a book called Good Inside by Dr. Becky Kennedy. And one of the things she talks about is the the most effective way to deal with the child having a tantrum is before asking them to do anything, just acknowledge what they're feeling is true. If you just go, no, you're wrong for feeling that way, it's a recipe for disaster. And so we basically went, we can't just fight someone's version of the facts with more facts. We need to disarm some sort of primal mental barrier, rational barrier, before we can then kind of open up a bit of room for them to maybe accept a different version of events. And again, it's just like this shit isn't in strategy books. It's like, psychology. I actually think reading about, I'm biased on this because I have a toddler, but reading on child psychology is one of the best ways to understand all psychology, because we all are governed by very similar things, right? You may think that only children throw tantrums, but no fucking way. We do it all the time. It's just they're more contained. We get over it quicker. But understanding how to, and going back to the relational side, understanding how to deal with someone basically being difficult doesn't start by going, here's why you're wrong. It's just going to piss them off, you know?
I disagree
Um,
on the tantrum part because
Do
I don't know
adults
how
get over
fast you've
their
seen my
tantrums
toddler get
quicker,
over a
Brad?
tantrum when I give him a cookie.
Yeah, but yeah, but but you know what I'm saying? It's like the worst thing is gonna say, "Hey, here's why you're fucking wrong," right? Oh yeah, everyone gets convinced that way, but except they never really do. But if you start by going, okay, here's and actually in the group yesterday, Whitney, as you saw, I don't know if you saw, but like we were talking about this in the Salmon Crew group about like the first place is just like find some common ground and then get into the differences. If you just go into like, here's all the areas in which I disagree with you, congratulations, someone just put up their mental barriers. But anyway, reading way beyond just what we do is yeah, super crucial.
Yeah, I have a quick example
Please.
of exactly what you're talking about, Michael. And I wish it was my strategy. I can't take credit for it. It was done by a brilliant comm strategist. Her name is Annie Yen. At the time, she was at Johannes Leonardo, but basically, they won Uber by coming up with this comm strategy based entirely around atomic habits. She read Atomic Habits and
Hmm.
it applied to the client brief. It, insofar as a big business problem they were having was getting people to not just default to UberX to get some of the other Uber products. And she was reading Atomic Habits at the time, and she goes, "Oh my God, the science of habit formation is exactly what we need to be thinking about
Yeah.
when we're thinking about how to like crack this brief and business problem." So
So
Yeah.
I've actually used that same exact strategy on another app
yeah,
where it
there you
was
go.
all the strategy was we need to make this habit or this the best apps and loyalty programs or daily habits. Here's
Yeah.
the what you need to build a daily habit with it, and here's how we're going to construct everything around it.
Yeah, a great head of planning I used to work with. He always just used this trick. He used it a lot on pitches when you're right, like really pressed for time to get somewhere decent. But he always would start by going, "What's a good analogy for this brief?"
Mm-hmm.
And beyond strategy, like what's a good analogy for what's going on here? And so, he would equate like he's very, very smart. He would equate like, how to get people to buy insurance with how the tobacco industry actually kind of how the behavior change around tobacco industry could be reversed. It's like just crazy shit. But you go, it's a little bit like getting people to, if you wanted to get people to smoke, you do this, and that. And so finding the right analogy could be quite interesting as well, because analogies are great. Um,
Oh yeah.
Joe, and any thoughts before we move on to the last one, although we kind of already covered it, and then we'll open up the floor.
I think I work at Quality Meats and a strategist at Quality Meats, and we have a. I think it's good. I mean, I would do. I work there, but we have a really, in my opinion, great model for how we think about advertising. It's called Dumb in a Smart Way, right? And I think what's so good about Dumb in a Smart Way, and I'll talk through a little bit about how it works, is it starts from the truth, which is the truth number one is people fucking hate to be told what to do. They hate it and will not do it. So, like, that's half of the equation. And we say you have to you have to get people to do the thing you want them to do as a brand by saying something smart enough to get around that natural inclination for people go like, I'm not going to do what you say, brand. You can't just be like, buy my delicious cereal, and people aren't going to do that. You have to tap into something else. And then the dumb part is to whatever we do, we have to do it in a dumb enough way to grab people's attention. So we've got like a really nice bit of agency IP that frames how we think about things. And the truth is, I'll always start with a client brief from that thing. It's just like, this is what we want them to do. And then you start to ask, well, why can't we just tell them that? And sometimes a client might come to you with a project where they're like, oh, we've got an amazing offer. We're going to 90% off our top product or whatever. And then you're like, oh, I don't really need to say that in a smart way. We can just do a big, dumb, fame driving attention driving thing. But 99% of the time, what the client wants consumers to do, you can't simply just tell them facts, like you say, to do it. So, like, the first thing for us as an agency is always working out the smart. It's going like, okay, this is what we want them to do. What do we need to do in order to get them to do it? And like that's always where I was like, and comms is really useful against that side of the equation because sometimes it's not telling them anything.
Hmm.
The thing to get them to do the thing that you want them to do might be something completely different.
Yeah. One last
Yeah.
thing for me on this. I was kind of quite late to this trick, but it is something that kind of came into my radar through comp strategy. And if you look at a comp strategy model, like let's use a very templated model like the stuff that Julian Cole will talk a lot about, you always have a role for communications, which is preceded by a barrier. We don't spend enough time talking about the fucking barrier, right? We just go, it's an awareness job. And because it just assumes that, of course, people are just waiting to be aware of this thing, like Joe was saying. But, I quite like the kind of the sound of a strategy. And so the sound of a strategy always usually goes, we have this challenge, except comms, audience barrier. Therefore, we're going to do this thing in comms. And that middle bit is so under discussed, right? So for me, that's kind of my go-to now is like, okay, you want to do all these things. You want to talk about how, this institution is great. You want to talk about how your banking's great. You want to talk about how your new chocolate bar is great. If it's so great, why the fuck don't people do it already? And sometimes it's because it's
Mhm.
new, and sometimes it's because they haven't seen it. But most of the times that you don't have enough money just to kind of brute force your way into mass awareness. You need to find something that's a little bit more resonant. And so always starting with like, why isn't this happening already? If it's so great, why wouldn't you just release it? And usually that gets you to some interesting places about where comms can offer a slightly different articulation of the problem to
Yeah.
solve.
We had a funny challenge with the client a few years, this is like some years ago. It was for an underwear brand. And the client is talking all about, you know, RTBs and techs and specs and all the stuff they've put into their underwear to make it the most comfortable and best underwear you can possibly wear and blah 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 blah. And the entire barrier and the thing that drove the entire comm strategy was an insight from a focus group where a guy goes, if I'm even thinking I have underwear on, I've already thought about it too much. And I'm like, that's it. Like, that's the entire barrier. Like, you don't want them to think about having to buy this brand. You don't want them to think about this category and making this purchase, which led to the entire comm strategy of like underthink it. Like how do you help somebody underthink this purchase?
Mm-hmm.
And like I think it builds off kind of like what Joe talks about here of just like smart things in a dumb way. Like
Yeah.
what are the dumb ways that we can get people to underthink having to buy underwear, which is
It's one
like
of
a silly purchase most of the time.
it's one of the reasons why every brand and their mother in the UK, every insurance and price comparison brand has a mascot. Because insurance is fucking boring and price comparison is fucking boring. And so what do? They go, hey, we have the Admiral, we have the Meerkats, we have uh Go Compario or whatever he's called. They all have a mascot because it's basically they went, if we keep bothering people with the facts and how good it is as a platform, you don't do that. Just create a little bit of IP that just makes you basically go, oh, I like them Meerkats. That's sorry to say, that's sometimes I actually used to work with well, I knew the guy who was the head of planning for the compare the market, and he said the role of planning on this account is very simple. Don't let the clients kill the meerkats. That's all you need to do. If you do that, because it works so well, any prop you put under, like now we have meals, great. It's an ad where the meerkats have a meal. But just don't fuck with the meerkats. They are so important to keep this brand kind of winning. And
Hmm.
sometimes that's all there is. It's a bit dumb, but it works.
Yeah.
And then they have a few other more like unique props and stuff. But in that case, I always thought it was like it's very simple. Don't overcomplicate the meerkats. We already
There,
talked about this. Go on.
there was something that like it sparked in my brain. It goes back to one of the comms like skill sets and just thinking about comms and stuff and tackling briefs, and it builds off something that Joe had said about like dumb in a smart way. And it had me like, and I remember looking at the Quality Meets website when we were talking about this panel, and like the big thing that's on your website is like nobody cares what you have to say. And I think it's a lost skill in comms is this
Hmm.
this idea of reciprocity is like we as advertisers, and we can be this way definitely in comms too, are greedy motherfuckers. We want people to like this, comment, subscribe, do a TikTok dance, watch a video. Please don't skip this thing. Join our, contest, whatever it may be. And like, what do you get in return? You get a fucking ad. Yay. Like, and I think there's a lost art in valuing people's attention
Yeah.
and time. And I go back to like what media was built upon, even going like you go way back, and this go way back old school days. And it's like the concept of media was invented to subsidize the cost of entertainment on TV. You watch this ad, you get free television, right? So there's a value exchange like inherently built into that dynamic. But are you when that value exchange is gone and I can avoid you at all costs? And I don't need you to subsidize the cost of my free entertainment because I'm paying for my entertainment. And I think that it's a lost art to actually bake in this idea of reciprocity in comms and everything we do. Like
Yeah.
if I'm asking you to do this, or I'm interrupting your time or attention, or I am trying to get you to behave in a certain way. Like, what are you getting in return that's more than what we were talking about before, like 30-second spots jammed in your face or 6-second YouTube pre-roll videos that have enough time to scream your brand's name before you're hitting the skip button, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think it goes back, it hits on that point of like nobody really cares what you have to say. Like
Yeah.
value and earn their attention and don't take it for granted.
Yeah, I quite like that the industry is kind of getting more into the habit of talking about just the commercial value of entertainment. Because let's be, if you're interrupting someone, at least give them a little bit of a good time or something to smile about or whatever. System One has a lot of research on this, but more importantly, they have a lot of really good one-liners from Orlando Wood, like entertain for commercial gain. That's great. It's simple, but it also speaks to that need for like respect. A creative director I work with always says, no one ever got bored into buying something. Maybe some people have, but it's rare, or maybe they buy and hate you afterwards, and no one really wants that.
I'd love to just jump on this because it's actually
Please.
I was on a I was on a pitch last week. This week, it's been a long week for me. On a pitch this week, and I had to do the thing which is kind of a little bit suicidal, I think, for advertising agency people to say in pitch meetings. And like we were having a discussion after we'd presented the stuff, and the clients basically said like a load of things, and I don't need to be any more specific, but the point I needed to make to them was like, I think you're overestimating what advertising can do. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? And I think that's something, and I kind of felt a little bit like, oh, no, I shouldn't say this, but my desire to be honest got the better of me. I was like, I don't think if your product's $40 and you're on the shelf with competitors at $8, I don't think advertising can solve that problem. Like, I don't think there's anything we can do in an ad that is going to make people choose your $40 product, which is smaller than an $8 product that is bigger. So maybe you need to be on a different shelf. And like that's com strategy. You know what I mean? It's saying actually your retail touch point, that needs to change. You need to be around the other products that cost $40 and are this big rather than the $8 products that are that big. And like possibly could lose the pitch because of that. But it's
Way
you
to
have to be
go.
honest. You can't promise, or you could win the pitch because no one else has spoke the truth. But like I
Hmm.
do think like that's just something that it's not the first thing you do when you get a client brief. Maybe in that case, it was the last thing we did, perhaps. We
It
got a
it
client
can
brief.
be
But I think that
jarring.
honesty about
Yeah.
what advertising can do, no one's out there saying this. Maybe Byron Sharp touches on it a little bit with like, oh, it's all, low attention, it's
Hmm.
little nudges here and there. And I just think that's something that maybe as an industry, we'd all benefit if we were a little bit more honest about what we're saying clients can do and really thinking from a consumer perspective. No, there's no 30-second piece of film that can convince me to spend $40 on a smaller product that sits next to an $8 one. There's
Can I
none.
add can I add an example to that? I used to work on a shopping center kind of well, it's basically a business that owns a bunch of shopping centers in the UK. And I worked with a media CSO who said something quite nice, just kind of set the scene. And he basically said, look, we've done the modeling, and the role of advertising here isn't to get people to visit you necessarily more, it's to avoid them forgetting about you. And it was a very different thing because he basically said advertising is going to play a weak force and it's a defensive maneuver to not lose what you have. Because the easiest thing people can do is just buy on Amazon. So that's why you should invest in advertising, not because we think you're going to triple your visits, but you're going to stop losing the as much of the leaky bucket. And again, it's like at the time I was like, I'd never really seen someone describe advertising as a kind of a defensive versus an aggressive maneuver. It's like the reason why a lot of big brands like say Cadbury keep investing in advertising is because it secures them the shelf space that Tony's Chocolonis will never have, and it's okay, you know. And so I was found it quite interesting. It's almost like advertising is a bit of a moat, not necessarily oh, it's going to kind of
Mhm.
make everything 10 times better. No, it's just going to help you stay where you are, and that's where you need to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
if I can offer just a final thought because I do have to jump to a client meeting. I want a second, third, fourth, fifth, everything that Joe said, because ultimately comms strategy is not just about what levers you pull within advertising. It's what levers you pull in communications writ large to solve a client problem. So yeah, maybe it's telling them they're not in the right retail space. Maybe it's saying they need a huge PR activation and they need to think through their earned media strategy. Advertising, we can't treat what we do. We can't think of ourselves as hammers and everything else as a nail. We have to really look at like the broader painter's palette we have to work with. So I have to drop now, but
Yeah. No,
thank you for
thank you,
Nice
having
talk.
me,
Whitney.
Rob. And I just like to also be here and listen to these other smart guys talk. So,
Oh, thank
and
you.
thank you to everybody on the call. Thank you for
Cheers.
bearing with us.
Yeah, I slightly lost track of time, but I was just saying, yeah, I'm afraid, yeah, a bunch of us need to go to other things. But please, when I send you the email with the recording, please send me any questions you would have liked to see answered, because either I'll see if we can kind of get us to kind of add a few more thoughts into the write-up, which I'll do, or we'll find a way to somehow answer them. Because yeah, there's tons of stuff here to discuss. And yes, it may become a series with other guests. Who the fuck knows? But this feels necessary, and I really like how the response came through. So thank you.
Yay.
Have a good
Thank
day.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.